Today's episode of Fragments of Silicon is brought to you by the number 911 because that's the day it is, and I'm not going to make any more jokes.
It's nice to have my timing back. And indeed, welcome to another installment of Fragments of Silicon. I'm your host, Adam. Joining us, as always, is the regular crew. And we're going to let Petty Fan go first because, well, he's back in the saddle almost fully. He has the details.
I'm back at my computer. Note the upgrade in audio quality. And I should be able to start streaming the shows from now on. And physical therapy's been going all right. I see the doctor again on Monday and discuss if we're gonna unlock my brace some more to make it easier to move around. If he wants me to switch to a different brace or whatever. So there's that. And just been kind of playing games. Tomorrow, unless something comes up, I should be able to start streaming Final Fantasy again. So that'll be fun. And I also got Need for Speed, I think is like the 2015 reboot one, for like $5 on PSN. It's alright, except for the fact it requires you to be always online.
But Petty Fan, did you really need for speed, or did you just want for speed?
And yeah, I think that's it for me.
All right. Twilight, why don't you go?
Well, last Saturday we celebrated my mother's birthday, and it was pretty pleasant. She got a lot of gifts from her friends and family, and it was nice. Me and the landlord were having working on some landscaping for the yard. Well, part of the yard that's not necessarily mine, but something she's interested in doing though. It's been going well so far, and besides that, everything's been going well at work, and I've been playing the game I'll be doing for this Sunday, and that's about it.
All right, Alex, your go.
Had a little bit of a frustrating week because I had a lot of appointments, and there's a lot of yard work or road work going on because that's the season it is in Maine. And it's still been pretty humid, but not much to particularly speak of on that end. Video game wise, Banjo and Kazooie came out in Smash Ultimate, and I realized while I was playing that they have been releasing other spirits, so I've been playing that some to get back on the spirits that I hadn't gotten yet, and also Dead Cells, the latest update finally made it to Switch and consoles, so I'm going to be trying that out soon. Though also, while we weren't able to do it this past week, last week I started with one of my friends playing Secret of Mana from the Collection of Mana package together. This past week they were out of town, so I wasn't able to do it then, but hopefully later this week we'll be able to get together and play some more of that, because we only got to about we just got to the guy's navel, but that's because we had to do the thing. We wanted to get 2 players as early as possible, so we did the thing to get the girl first, and you have to go all the way through the haunted forest when it's too high of a level for you. So anyway, So that's about what I'm up to, which is a whole lot of not much for a whole lot of words. Oh, and I've been exhausted today because, as I mentioned, it's 9/11, and having the news on in the car and stuff, there's just been a lot of very exhausting recollections and stuff.
Yes, it's getting less exhausting because it's 18 years out now, but it's still exhausting. Let's see. Anyway, I suppose it's my go now. Not much in the way of personal news. Thankfully we were outside of the hurricane's blast. Some good news. Kevin is still with us. Yeah, I think he lost power for maybe like a few hours. No damage to his domicile or anything like that, so he's doing fine. He'll be with us in the post show, same as always. Let me see. Also, Mac has appeared from the haze of fog once again, and he's hoping to rebuild the MSP archives. We'll see how that goes. Like, I'm not exactly confident, considering, a good chunk of that is kind of just gone. I mean, we covered this in the past, but but hey, if they can recover it, because Keith will be working on that project as well. More power to them. And maybe they can, and if that's successful, they can recover the early episodes of this show, because we're still missing two seasons and like the first 4 shows of season 3. Anyway, and that's really about it for news from my sector. So merrily we shall roll along to the interview portion of the broadcast. And joining us this week is Micheal Hermann of Retrosoft Studios.
Hi guys, how you doing? Good evening.
We're doing fine. How are you doing today?
Good, living the dream.
That's good to hear. Right, so how we like to get started is we like to get to know the person behind the studio, behind the game, whatnot, and we like to start by asking them what got you interested in video games, both on a personal and a professional level.
Okay, good question. So my video game journey started when I was, I want to say 6 years old, when my father brought home an Atari 800 computer. So that was my first home gaming experience. And then really about the same time I started, I was 6, so I started remembering going to arcades at restaurants. They were all over the place at that point. But that, the first time I went to the Ground Round was the restaurant. If any listeners or any of you guys are from the East Coast, around New Jersey, PA area, they had a huge. Well, I remember it huge. It was probably a closet, but an arcade in there with about, I don't know, 10 or so arcade machines. And I remember playing in there. And then when my father brought home the Atari 800, I remember playing that as well. So those are really what got the bug. I caught the bug with that, and I've really followed my along ever since, from the Atari 800 to the Atari 2600 to the NES, Sega Genesis, Sega CD, 3DO. I can name them all, but I've loved them since I was 6, and that's really the first arcade experience and the first home console experience. Just had me hooked.
It sounds like a lot of that's a pretty common story.
Yeah.
We get on the show. It's like got X system or X computer back in the day and just kept with it throughout life. Like, that brings us to the question of how did you make the jump to making games for maybe not a living, but making games on as a professional.
Right. Yeah. So my I got into, so I am, I'll date myself. So when I was in college, the internet was really just starting to boom. You had the 4 search engines were out, like Lycos, I think Yahoo, trying to think of the other ones, Alta Vista, a couple other, maybe one or two other ones were out then. And I just really, I was into like computers as a younger when I was younger, we had an 8086 computer, and at the time, before the internet age, I'm kind of jumping around here. I started a little later in college. I want to back up to a little earlier, but you guys remember, depending on how old you are, before the internet, you would dial other computers and BBS stuff, right? So I was young and I was doing that. I started probably when I was 12 or 13. I started my own um, BBS board on my own PC that people could call into, go to our page, and I don't even know what we had on there. Nothing much. Maybe some anti-graphics or whatever. But that's really when I started programming, some basic stuff in BASIC, things of that nature. But unfortunately, we never upgraded our computer at home, and I lost interest. Then fast forward to where I had started college, I started getting back into it probably my senior year of college. But at that point, I had already just about finished my accounting undergraduate degree. I wasn't going to change majors, but it was something I was starting to mess around with as a hobby, as programming, things of that nature. Fast forward a little bit, I ended up getting my master's in software engineering, but not for game development, but for finance and accounting software. So that, which is my primary business that I'm in, is finance and accounting software. So we do a lot of integration work between various financial systems like that. But I've always had in the back of my mind, I wanted to make a game. So fast forward to about 2 years ago, I decided, after dabbling with doing a Wrestle Fest remake on my own, I decided, you know what, I'm going to make a fresh game, obviously very inspired by the original Wrestle Fest, but I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to get people who have more experience than I do, uh, making video games, involved with me in this project, and we're going to just have at it. So that's kind of an abbreviated version, but that's kind of the road I took from an accountant in college to hopefully, a video game designer going forward. Well, I'll probably still keep the software development job in finance and accounting, but yeah, that's how I got here.
Like, it's quite the journey. Like, you know, um, did you find the transition from doing business software to making games a tough one?
You know what? I'll tell you, I initially it would have been, but I'm not the lead programmer, I'm not the lead artist.
Mhm.
I think, I have a lot more respect for those guys who go at it, those indie studios that go at it and try to do everything themselves. It's tough. I tried doing that kind of in my spare time, maybe 4 years ago, and I just didn't get anywhere. There's not, I'm a father of three, I'm married. I just didn't have enough, there's not enough hours in the day to do all that. If you wanted to do, a project of our size that we're doing. And um, so I don't think the transition wasn't terrible, because I probably spend most of my time on the business side of things more than the development side. Now, don't get me wrong, I test the game every day. I have gone into code and made changes. I've even done some pixel update or pixel artwork updates. So I do have my hand in everything, but I do spend probably more than half of my time is just on the business development side of things versus the development side.
Like, well, that's an important aspect of making a game. It's like, honestly, one that doesn't get talked about as much as the game dev side.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely. I mean, that in and of itself is a full-time job. I mean, and especially with our game, we have licensing that we're dealing with. We have software that we're dealing with, and then just the sheer amount of artwork. I have an art director that just manages the other artists on the game. We have, I think, 8 or 9 artists working on the game right now in various capacities. Um, and it's just the number of sprites that we have going through. It's a lot for a small group of people to manage, which is why I've had to outsource the majority of it.
Hmm. And how many people are working on the game currently?
Last count was like 17 or 18. So now they're not all full-time employees. A lot of them are contractors. Most of them are contractors.
Mm-hmm.
But they're all, I'm probably one of their biggest clients at this current time, especially the artists. I mean, I have artists that have been pretty much working close to full time on the game for the last couple of months, just because the sheer amount of artwork that has to get done for a game like this. To kind of put it in perspective, each character we have is over, it's probably closer to like 900 sprites per character. So, it's a lot. It's a lot, and so but then we have, in addition to that, I've helped with our social media and marketing. I've helped with our licensing and helping me field all the other kind of business opportunities that have come up since we've gotten a little bit of notice out on the social networks. Um, the majority of that 17, though, like I said, is artists. So, couple programmers, obviously my lead programmer, and then two other programmers also. So yeah, and then you got the lawyer that I have to run stuff by, and the accountant. A lot of stuff that I didn't really think of in getting into this, especially when you're dealing with licensing and having to write up licensing agreements and things that I really had no experience in. So I had to go out and get people with experience if I wanted to do this right. And that's the same way. I didn't want to. It's a pretty ambitious project for a first-time game developer. So that's why I wanted to get people that this isn't their first time being a game developer. And I can say I have the least amount of experience on my team as far as game development, which is kind of funny. At least I find it funny. But I just the point being, I've surrounded myself with really talented people to help me kind of see my vision and get this game made.
Well, that's not a bad thing, especially in ensuring that the game gets developed properly.
Right.
Anyway, but perhaps we should recenter ourselves a bit and actually talk about the game itself, because we haven't really gone into that yet.
Sure.
So for the uninitiated, what is Retromania Wrestling?
Okay, so Retromania Wrestling is a 2D sprite based artwork arcade gameplay wrestling game. So it's kind of a little bit of a throwback to the arcade games of the 80s and 90s, and then the kind of the first generation of wrestling games that came out for like the Super NES and Sega Genesis. So it's like the Map Manias, the Wrestle Fest, the Saturday Night Slam Masters, if you remember any of these games, Wrestle War, WWF Superstars. All we're taking kind of Fire Pro Wrestling, another great one that still has a great version out there today. But we're kind of taking things from all those that we liked and adding some new stuff that we like, and it's kind of it's just a pick up and play 2D arcade action wrestling game that we think people are really going to enjoy and have a lot of fun with.
I'm like, I can definitely see the Wrestle Fest influence, like just at a glance.
From the art style, yeah, absolutely.
Like, I think I might be the only one here who actually played like Wrestle Fest and all the wrestling games back in the day. Like,
you guys are missing out.
I think I played them like a little bit at friends' houses, but I was never good at it, and also. Well, I don't know. Some of it is probably because those games were kind of janky because of the time, but I don't know.
Well, yeah.
I also literally didn't know what I was doing, so.
Well, there's no denying that a lot of those games were not good. I'm looking at a lot of the LGN, WWF, WWE titles come to mind. I mean,
Yeah.
Like, I remember how bad.
God, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I remember how bad like the NES WrestleMania game was. For example.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the first gen stuff was horrible. I mean, the NES wrestling games were, for the most part, all terrible. Pro Wrestling was good, the original black box Nintendo game, which was fun, although limited as far as like moves and animations and things of that nature. But it was still, I guess for wrestling fans, it was all we had. If you couldn't go to the arcade, because that's when like Map Mania was out in the arcade, which was awesome in comparison. But yeah, I mean the early stuff was not good at all.
Yeah, I'd say it wasn't until like the Genesis Super NES that we started really getting decent, at least licensed wrestling games over here. That's when like WWF Raw and WWF WrestleMania Arcade came out. But
I would agree. That's Super NES, Sega Genesis versions. They finally got a little bit better.
Yeah.
But Adam, he asked sarcastically, why did the World Wildlife Federation make wrestling games?
Funny story about that. I mean, the WWF and the WWF used to have a naming agreement that went tits up. Like, yeah. But was there anything else that prompted you to take influence from the earlier era of wrestling games instead of like, what's considered to be like the golden age of wrestling games, the PlayStation 1 N64 era?
Well, I guess that's really relative to when you grew up. Um, so my fondest memories were of WWF Superstars, Wrestle Fest. I remember playing Matt Mania, like that whole Techno series of
Right.
games is what I really was enamored with growing up. I saw those in the arcades. And I really loved those games and I just gravitated towards them. And I think part of it is, the N64 ones I did play as well. I actually, well, I should say I played the PlayStation version of them, not necessarily the N64 version. I've since gone back and played them, and they are great as well. But I preferred I love pixel art. I love that style. I mean, it's still some of my favorite games today, like the Messenger that came out, the kind of the take on a little bit on Ninja Gaiden.
Right.
You guys have played that. Like I love that.
I haven't had time to play that one yet.
Yeah, it's really good. And like so I'm just partial to that art style, and I think that's probably was the biggest factor in kind of going the 2D route versus a 3D route. And the other thing is just there is a great, WWE has a 3D game right now, and I know it gets mixed reviews sometimes. They may need to freshen it up a little bit, but it's still, I enjoyed it. It's a good 3D game, and I just wanted a kind of an arcade 2D experience. Now there is Fire Pro, but I would say that's more of a simulation than an arcade type game. But I'm a big fan of Fire Pro as well. I mean, I like all wrestling games, but I think what was missing was just a 2D arcade game on out right in 2019 2020, and that's what I thought. Give the wrestling fans that are video game fans a little more variety, so they have something else they can play as well.
Well, I mean, retro is in these days.
Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's also having one of these that isn't riddled with modern day bullshit. Like there is Wrestle Fest for the iOS,
Yeah.
but it's very much a mobile game.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I wasn't crazy about the cell shading artwork in that either.
Mhm.
I think that they had the right idea. I just wish they would have executed it a little bit differently.
Well, there's like only one way you can really do it on a mobile device, apparently.
Yeah. Well, it's tough without a controller. Like I don't know how we would make our game without a controller. I feel like it's kind of a necessity, and having touch. If you have to assume that the majority of your player base is going to only use touch controls, it makes it a
Mhm.
little bit more difficult.
Yeah. I'm like, I am not a fan of traditional games on a mobile device because I played them. They're awful. Like, just a touchscreen is not a substitute for a controller.
100% agree.
But thankfully, this thing is coming into existence. Now, go ahead.
No, yeah. Just we're scratching that itch that because WrestleFest, the original WrestleFest, was never ported to a console either.
No,
which was a tragedy due to licensing issues. But
well, it's probably not just because of licensing, but it was an arcade game, and there probably wasn't a system that would have been able to do WrestleFest.
Good point. Yep.
So it's kind of a push. It's more that WrestleFest hasn't been released. Like the original WrestleFest hasn't been released on a modern platform. And that's a crying shame.
Yeah.
But anyway, so your game actually features licensed wrestlers here.
Absolutely.
What was the impetus behind getting real world wrestlers into the game as opposed to coming up with a completely fictitious roster?
Well, one, I personally wanted real wrestlers in the game. We thought about doing the fictitious roster route, but I thought, one from a marketing standpoint too. It wasn't all just I wanted to get licensed wrestlers, but I think we would garner more attention with licensed wrestlers. They all have their built-in social media following, and honestly, like I wanted to play as guys I grew up watching. You know what I mean? So that was part of it, and guys I'm following today that I like. So that was it was kind of those two reasons really. And initially we were actually toying around with the idea of possibly putting YouTubers in as wrestlers because I'm a big fan of a lot of the YouTube shows, the retro gaming YouTube, like Game Chasers and
Mhm.
Angry Video Game Nerd, Pat the NES Punk, a bunch of those guys. And I
Yeah.
was toying with that idea as well. And eventually I decided, well, let me see if I can get the Road Warriors. And they
Uh-huh.
were the first people we signed. And once we got them, I'm like, all right, well, I got the Road Warriors. I'm going to fill this out with licensed wrestlers.
Like continuing on with the Wrestle Fest connections.
Yep. Yeah, they were the champs, so they got to defend their belts in my game.
Neat. So this is also going to be tag team focused.
Yeah. So as far as game modes, we're going for single player, tag team,
Mm-hmm.
6-man tag, 8-man tag, retro rumble due to trademark, obviously. So our rumble will be called the Retro Rumble, and then we also have cage matches thrown in there, and we're still experimenting with different types of gameplay or game modes that we can add in there as well. So like tournament modes, things of that nature.
Hmm. Oh,
But
it
we
sounds like
like our real goal is to pack in as much as we can before launch. So if we can fit it in and get it done, not that I'm the one setting our launch date, which we haven't even announced yet. We're aiming for the first quarter of next year, and I don't really want to push that back. But we're not going to push out a crappy product. So it'll be done when it's done, but we really are trying to stick to a schedule because I feel if you just from my experience on the other side of my life and it's in the finance and accounting software, if you don't put a date on something, things will always slip. So we're marching towards a specific date and hopefully we hit it.
Hmm. Well, hopefully things will work out on that end.
Yep.
Like, granted, when it comes to video game development, I will not. I will speak frankly here. I will not be surprised if this game does get delayed for one reason or another. I've seen it a lot.
No, I know it's probably more the norm than the exception anymore. Um,
Uh,
yeah, I hear you. I mean, it can happen. Like like I said, we're not gonna rush something out if it's not ready. Because I think the backlash would be worse than delaying.
Probably. I'm like. Anyway, getting back to the roster. So, who have you signed so far?
So we have the Road Warriors, the Blue World Order, Stevie Richards, Hollywood Nova, and the Blue Meanie.
Mm-hmm.
We have Austin Idol back from Memphis Wrestling. We have Tommy Dreamer in the House of Hardcore,
Mm-hmm.
Colt Cabana, and Zack Sabre Jr. I think that's everybody we've announced so far. I don't want to get slipped up because there's guys we still have unannounced wrestlers that we have not included yet.
Right. And how big of a roster are you looking to build here?
Well, ideally over time it gets much larger. For launch, we're looking at 12 to 16 wrestlers at launch.
Okay. And beyond that,
We would love to do DLC packs of additional wrestlers. The more we license players, we have to develop a fan base because obviously licensing costs money, artwork costs money. Once we can prove out that we're going to have a fan base for this game, then we can we have a successful launch. Then we'll look at reinvesting and dedicating some resources to additional DLC.
sounds good. Sounds good as a release roadmap goes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're always going to get compared to because a lot of games now have huge rosters, right? And ideally we would too, but it just being it our first game from our studio, we're really concentrating and putting our resources into the gameplay, and we're trying to have this be the first step of a franchise that hopefully has a long life. So we really want to try to nail down a good, fun, solid gameplay mechanics, and then just build off of that, and then the sky's the limit.
I see. And along with that, what sorts of arenas are you going to be fighting in?
Yeah, so we have a array of arenas. So we have a story mode also in the game, which is another mode I didn't mention. So we have a story mode, and the first arena you actually fight in is a gym that looks like Stevie Richards Fitness um, gym. So SRF Fitness is Stevie Richards' fitness brand that he's been running now for the last couple of years, and we have a gym dedicated to him in here. That because the first part of the story is the main character is going to Stevie to help him rehab and get back in the ring. So along those lines, we have your traditional style arenas. Arenas you might see in old school TV tapings of like 1980s wrestling,
Mm-hmm.
more modern arenas that are used now by some current promotions in both the United States and in Japan, and then a couple arenas that you may see like overseas, and then kind of if you remember the old pay-per-views like Bash at the Beach, things of that nature, we may throw a beach arena in. So we have our lead up arena pixel artist is amazing. So he's got some really cool stuff in there, and that we have lined up that we haven't shown yet.
Sounds good. Like, yeah, I like the beach arenas. Like, it's a shame that it wasn't more of a thing.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was hard from a production standpoint being on the beach and filming everything and getting the lighting right and all that. It's the only thing I could think of. Plus, sand always gets in the way.
No doubt, but WCW was crazy like that.
Yeah. Yep.
It wasn't the only kind of place that they did. Like sometimes they would be at the pool
Right. Right.
or at Sturgis. But anyway, have you sought out any sort of licensing agreement with an actual wrestling group like Ring of Honor or
So,
TNA?
yeah, we have Tommy Dreamer's House of Hardcore promotion.
Mhm.
And then we have another one that we haven't announced yet that we're going to be announcing in another month or so. So we're definitely open to working with other promotions as well. So we have talked to a couple of ones. Ones might not work right now, but may work in the future. But we're definitely looking to add more of that type of content.
Mhm.
But yeah, the House of Hardcore right now was the first one that we signed, and then we'll be announcing another one in a couple weeks.
Sounds good. Sounds good. And I'm not sure how much you can speak to this, but in terms of like licensing focus, is it just North America, or are you looking to like Japan as well?
No, I mean it's probably more North American focused right now, but I wouldn't rule anything out. We've actually had discussions with some other people, but really this game is just anything wrestling related is on the table. So Japanese, UK, China, Mexico, South America. I'm willing to talk to anybody about if they're interested and we can get a deal and make something work, and players would enjoy playing it. We're willing to discuss it, and that's really been our whole kind of strategy from the get go. Is when talking to people is like, hey, if we can make something work that's good for both sides, we're willing to license it and get it in the game. I mean, it's wrestling, the more variety, the better. The more variety we can add to this game, the more replay value it'll have. And I think people will enjoy it that much more.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Anyway, so what platforms is this game in development for?
So right now we have approved the PC, the Nintendo Switch, and then we're awaiting approval for the Xbox One and the PS4 as well. So we're hoping to target the three main consoles that are out, and then the PC.
And like, is development on all of the versions going on simultaneously?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the engine we have supports all of them. It actually there's built-in exporters out to all the consoles.
Are you using Unity?
No, it's actually Game Maker Studio.
Yeah. Familiar with that?
Yeah, and that actually supports Mac along with Android, iOS as well. We may look. We've actually gotten a decent amount of inquiries about doing a Mac release, and as long as it seems pretty straightforward from given the Game Maker engine to put it out. If we can do it, we definitely will look at doing that as well.
Mm-hmm. Any consideration towards a Linux port?
We haven't really got. You're honestly the first person that has actually brought that up. The one thing I would like to do that unfortunately, Game Maker's done it, but they don't really support it yet, is to have like a Raspberry Pi. And I know that's a different code base. It is a kernel of Linux. But that's something I have a personal interest in, looking to do something like that.
See. And circling back to the Nintendo Switch version, is it going to be the same version that you would get on the Xbox One or the PlayStation 4? Or have you had to make some adjustments to make it fit that particular system?
No, I mean, that's one of the advantages of doing a 2D pixel art game, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we don't really have all the systems we're targeting have more than enough capability of running this game. So all features will be on all consoles. As of right now, we don't have any exclusive content for any of the consoles.
That's good to hear. Such things can make people angry.
Right.
Very, very angry. Anyway, in regards to the PC, are you looking to release an early access version of the game?
Probably not, I would say. I'm not sure if it does more harm than good. I've looked into both ways. It's an interesting take, but even now, right now, we're showing the games at various events through development, right? To kind of get a smaller audience playing the game. So far there's a game convention called Too Many Games that's right near where I actually live in Pennsylvania. That we went to. They had about 12 to 15,000 people there over the weekend. So we were nonstop having people play the game. We probably had over 100 people playing the game and got a lot of great feedback that way. But there's obviously, and we know there's still a ton of bugs. We know there's a lot of work to do, and just the nature of kind of social media, I think I'd rather just wait until we can get a little further along than doing an early release.
Makes sense. I suppose in lieu of an early access release, are you looking to do an open or closed beta of the game?
Yeah, we have a couple people have contacted us, and we have about 10 people doing closed beta testing right now. And as we get closer and get further along in our build, we're gonna probably add more people to that list, and we'll probably do an announcement on our social media when we're looking for more people to help us out with testing.
Okay.
So yeah, closed beta is probably definitely in play.
Makes sense. And let me see. Finally, have you sorted out how much you're going to be selling the base game for?
So pricing has not been set, but I can say it will be under $30. So we haven't really. We're still discussing internally what our ideal price point is, but I know at a max it would not go over 30. But I still think that it's going to be under 30, like a decent amount under 30.
Okay. And I'll see if my colleagues have any further questions at this point.
So this is maybe a weird question for a wrestling game, but is there any thought or kind of a mode where you have like a script, like of what you're supposed to do, and then you have to like fulfill those conditions while you're trying to put on a good show and stuff, or is it all just straightforward?
Well, yeah, there's no. So it's I see what you're saying. Not necessarily a script, but in our story mode, there is kind of a very light, I will say light RPG element to it, where you will be posed with decisions that you have to make through the story mode, and then based on those decisions you will have different matches throughout the story mode. So there's in that regards there's a script that you will have to, it's more like a choose your own adventure kind of, if you remember those books, of a story mode. Again, it's not, no, by no means an RPG. It's a very light story mode, but it's a fun story that I hired a writer to write for us, and I love it. I think it came out really good. and I think people will enjoy playing it. There's some cameo appearances from other people in the wrestling community that if you're follow wrestling, you'll definitely know them. But in that regard, but to a more kind of sports entertainment style script that you would have to follow. Nothing like that. No.
I didn't expect it. It's just something that I've thought of since thinking about wrestling games, because I'm
Right.
not a huge fan of wrestling, but to me, the idea of wrestling as like a very high skill stunt performance is still an interesting idea. That it would be interesting, like, okay, well, you have to win this match, but you also have to use such and such a special move so many times, and you have to like almost get held to so far.
No, it's a really good idea. Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of it.
Hmm. Anyway, I just thought I'd ask.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Anyone else?
I think I'm good.
I'm good.
All right. Well, I guess I have one final question. In regards to the PC version, what storefronts are you releasing on?
Undecided as of yet. We're actually right in the process now of investigating that.
Huh.
So, Steam's the easy answer, but we're also looking at Epic. We're looking at a couple other ones as well. So we're kind of to be determined with that as well.
Such as the times we live in.
Yep. But yeah, we're pretty much open. I'm not sure the ins and outs of everything, so we're looking into what the pros and cons are, the various distribution networks that we can use.
Right.
I want to say all of them because obviously we want to reach the most people possible. So if that, that's, we don't want to exclude somebody if we can have we're a little bit of a niche game because just wrestling in general is a little bit of a niche game area. But we want to be open to as many people as we can be.
Well, on that front, it's usually all of the other stores or EGS. That's
Right.
just mainly more because of Epic's policies. They're right now, unless you're a certain game or you're coming in later or what, it's a whole thing of how they set up their stores, but hopefully that'll change in the future. Anyway.
Yeah.
Micheal, I'd like to thank you for being with us today and sharing the imparts of your game with us. And I'm looking forward to seeing how Retromania develops. And hopefully it'll be on track for next year. Anyway.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it, guys.
No problem. Anyway, the game is Retromania Wrestling. It's currently in development for the PC and the Nintendo Switch with Xbox One and PlayStation 4 versions pending approval. Set to launch in the first quarter of 2020. Petty Fan, play us to the next segment. All right. Welcome to the topic of discussion. So this week we are talking about the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast launched on 9/9/99 in North America. So that makes it 20 years in this country.
It was only a few months earlier in Japan, right?
Actually, I believe it was about a year.
Oh.
People forget how long it took for consoles to launch back in the 90s. I'm like, it's like, it's like there were gaps, and it wasn't just hardware either. It was software. It took a lot longer for stuff to get localized back in the day than it does now. That's just technology, among other things.
Mm-hmm.
And the Dreamcast. There's a lot to be said about the system. A lot of it good, quite a bit of it depressing, because I'm fairly sure that the general gaming populace that, skews older knows the story of the Dreamcast. Younger folks probably don't know what a Dreamcast is. And a lot of that, I think, is on Sega, because, Sega, if it isn't like the Sega Genesis, they're not interested in mining that nostalgia. And that's always been a bit of a frustration for me, because, Sega was more than the Genesis. Like, the Dreamcast is one of my favorite consoles. It's also my favorite period of Sega, because that was Sega at its, maybe not its most creative, but it's certainly one of the high points. It's one of the reasons why the system and why that era of Sega is so highly regarded. It's not just because the Dreamcast was a quirky system that released quirky games. It's Sega pushed just really fucking weird games as their main selling point. Shit like Crazy Taxi and Jet Set Radio. Shenmue. A lot of this stuff does flow from the 90s and just how new 3D technology was. It's like it wasn't really defined what was a hit in the third dimension quite yet. So you got a lot of experimental shit, and it was glorious. Look, I mean, and it's not just Sega either. Capcom, like probably the best third party on the system. It's like just providing fucking arcade conversion after arcade conversion of Marvel versus Capcom 2, Techromancer. I could go down the list of just all the games that they provided, and not just the stuff that everyone knows. Weird quirky shit like Project Justice, the sadly languished sequel to Rival Schools, or Cannon Spike. That's a favorite of mine. Or it's also a system of shmups. Stuff like, obviously, like I'd say Ikaruga is probably the most famous Dreamcast-born shmup that's in existence. Although part of that is because that one managed to actually break out of the Dreamcast ecosystem and appear on other systems, as opposed to like Border Down. And it also had excellent arcade shmup ports like Mars Matrix and the Gigawing games. It's like Western supports. There was some contention there because EA very famously didn't support the Sega Dreamcast, choosing to instead put all of its resources in the upcoming PlayStation 2 launch. And indeed,
I feel like I've heard that before.
Well, it's like the PlayStation 2 casted a long shadow over the Dreamcast, really all over this time period. Because once again, it's one of those things that's maybe been lost through the decades, but I can tell you, I have not seen people like. There's an area system I've seen that people have got hyped up for than like the PlayStation 2. Like, it's like there is, Sony's marketing was just on fire during this time period. Because, they had done really well with the PlayStation 1, and there was an insane amount of hype for the PlayStation 2. Like, people were pre-ordering it like a year out. No joke. Like, people were talking about it in 1999. Like, that doesn't happen for, that doesn't happen for systems very often, much less, we're talking about, once again, a more primitive internet age in terms of technology. And And on that note, I can shift back to the Dreamcast because, the Dreamcast was a very forward-looking console. Pioneering so much shit that we take for granted. Like, it's like obvious. I'm obviously talking about online capabilities. The Dreamcast was not the first system. It was not the first console system to do online. It was not the first Sega console to do online. The Sega Saturn had online capabilities. It was restricted to a handful of games. In fact, the Sega Genesis had some internet capabilities as well. In both Japan and in North America. Like, you may have heard of the Sega Channel. That's not really an internet thing. That was done through coaxial cables. And, it's before broadband internet. But it had this thing called Catapult, which was a third-party online service. Not widely known, but I knew about it back in the day, mainly because of Nintendo Power. Shifting back to the Dreamcast was really the first mainstream attempt at getting games online on a console. By 1999, already part and parcel of the landscape on PC. Also considered to be one of the selling points of PC gaming at that time. Online. And this is also like the time of fucking Quake 3 Arena and Unreal Tournament hitting the scene. And yes, both of those games did hit the Dreamcast, actually. It's like, they weren't as good as the PC versions because, a controller is never going to be an optimal way to handle an FPS.
Indeed.
But the Dreamcast had 56K capabilities. It had broadband capabilities. Yes, a console releasing in 1999 had that. It had DLC, believe it or not. I'm not even joking. Like, Rayman 2 had some Dreamcast exclusive DLC. Was never able to, it's like, which is unfortunately lost to the winds of time, like so much other internet stuff. It's like, in Japan, the Dreamcast had the Virtual Console. It had a Virtual Console. You could download Sega Genesis games, and if I'm recalling correctly, you could start it on like the VMU. But this isn't about Japan. The closest we got to that kind of thing was the Sega Smash Pack. The Sega Smash Pack was not the best emulation endeavor from Sega, let's say. Actually kind of shitty. Let's see. There's so much here. The Sega Dreamcast Controller. So this is probably the biggest albatross of the system, in that the Sega Dreamcast controller is one of the shittier mainstream controllers to be released. I put it ahead of the N64 controller because you can adequately hold it with two hands. It's like there's no fucking Z trigger on the back that is going to sprain your hand if you have small hands. I honestly didn't have a problem with that because I have very large hands. My fingers could actually reach the Z button in the normal position.
That said, it's kind of large and clunky.
Yeah.
The cord comes out the wrong end because the VMU is in the top.
Right.
The VMU makes the whole thing bulkier because it has to have a big space for something big enough to play games on to fit in, and the thumbstick was very hard.
Yes, hard plastic. Once again, the thumbstick wasn't as bad as the N64 controller, in the fact that it didn't waste away as quickly as the N64 controller. It felt smoother to actually use, but once again, hard plastic. that's not good for your hands.
Mhm.
But I suppose the big innovation that the Dreamcast controller brought us, not the VMU, analog triggers. Yeah, this is the system that gave us analog triggers. And if you don't know why that's a big deal, go play a racing game.
Mhm.
You know, but I suppose we should also talk about the VMU. It's a really good encapsulation of the late '90s technology here, isn't it?
Mhm.
Because it's basically, yeah, I know it's a clone of the Pocket Station, but we never got the Pocket Station. The thing that
Also,
people
the Pocket Station went into a memory card slot on the console, not on the controller.
right. This was more akin to like the Tamagotchi devices of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Not coincidentally, one of the probably the most famous use of the VMU was the Chow Garden.
On account of Sonic being the figurehead and therefore the game like actually being planned to implement it well.
Well, it's also because a pet raising thing on such a primitive device worked out well. Once again, proven concept. Not just Tamagotchi. By this point, Digimon was the thing. And I think it's been lost on people that Digimon actually debuted as a game over here on like fucking black and white LCD screens.
Mm-hmm.
And they just re-released them.
In Japan.
No, they re-released. GameStop has anniversary Digimons.
Oh, they do?
In the US. Yeah. It's exactly the same as almost exactly the same as the 20th anniversary one in Japan, meaning it has all of the first 5 things all in one device, pretty much.
Nifty.
And like I said, I could just go on and on about the software library.
Well, there's something else important we need to discuss, the Sega Naomi.
Sega, the Naomi arcade board set.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big reason why the Dreamcast had so many good arcade ports, because a lot of them use basically the same system.
Mm-hmm.
Not the first time this concept was seen, because for example, the PlayStation that had arcade versions of that as well. A very famous example was the Tekken series. That was built on PlayStation arcade hardware, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have stuff like Sega and Capcom, and it was a very popular arcade board during the age. On the flip side of things, this is actually also Microsoft's entry into the console space. Like,
they were like partnering, weren't they?
Yes, they actually released a version of Windows CE for the Dreamcast, strictly for development. You had Sega Dreamcasts that were developed in Windows CE. There was even like a little logo there that proclaimed it. Looking at you, Sega Rally 2.
Mm-hmm.
It's like and this is a partnership that actually helped Microsoft advance their own console ambitions at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, the Dreamcast was not long for the world, at least in an official capacity.
Which is not entirely because of the Dreamcast's fault, and at least partially because of Sega was already 2 mismanaged consoles in the whole.
Yeah, the Saturn really did a number on them. But it's also the Dreamcast. It sold well, especially in the West, but it didn't sell well enough to save Sega. But I suppose if you want like the final reason why Sega got out of the console business, it's because their their largest stockholder, the CSK Corporation, like they're, I'm trying to remember, like if they like called in the loan, or it's because their head died, or if that happened later. I don't know. It's like it's basically, they owed too much money to them, and they had to pull the plug.
Unfortunate.
It's unfortunate because so the Dreamcast life started on September 9th, 1999, and technically ended in March of 2001, but the Dreamcast actually lived on for the rest of 2001. That is to say, it still got official releases until early 2002 over here. In Japan, it got official releases for a few more years. That's including Sega games. Like the last Sega Dreamcast game from Sega was 2004's Puyo Plop. Now, the last Sega Dreamcast game over here that's officially recorded, NHL 2K2. Like,
Yeah.
and that also gets into some last year fuckery. Namely like Shenmue 2. I'm like, because apparently Shenmue just has to do stupid exclusivity deals.
Yep.
Yeah. So for those who think that siding with the EGS was the first brain fart this franchise has ever had, oh no. Over here in North America, Shenmue 2 just Microsoft, for whatever fucking reason, decided to make this a North American Xbox exclusive. This was especially fucking painful because Shenmue 1 and Shenmue 2 had save game data connected to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the only way you could really make that work is if you had the European versions of those games, if you could want to read them. Yes, I'm still bitter about this.
Sounds like it.
I have the first Shenmue game, and keep in mind, this is fucking early 2000s. You're still dealing with PAL signals. So, yeah, that really wasn't an option for me.
Mm-hmm.
And, I couldn't get the Japanese version because I can't read that.
Mm-hmm.
So, fuck you, Microsoft. Anyway, like I said, the Dreamcast has so many great games on it. Granted, a lot of those games got ported off the system. The thing is, they weren't ported well in a lot of cases because the Dreamcast was very different than like the PlayStation 2. I think Grandia 2 is kind of held as the epitome of this. Although, like the Sonic Adventure ports are kind of jank too, especially Sonic Adventure DX.
Yeah.
I don't know why Sega keeps using the GameCube version to be the base of their ports, because they fucked that one up.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's like, some fared better than others, like Skies of Arcadia Legends. For the most part, that had better, had like more content, but it had worse sound because of disc compression.
Mm-hmm.
It's like those stupid Nintendo mini discs.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, I'm just talking about random stuff now. The Dreamcast was a great system. As far as collecting for it today goes, I have no idea because honestly, really don't focus on the collector side of this industry.
Unfortunately, the Dreamcast is still in that weird area where there are a number of things from it that have not really been re-released well.
Yes. And the Dreamcast is seeing like homebrew stuff these days, but a lot of systems are seeing that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so happy 20th to the Sega Dreamcast. I wish we had gotten another one. or
Yep.
even more, honestly. Anyway, so that'll about do it for this installment of Fragments Silicon. Coming up on the week ahead, we do have a Friday show coming up Friday morning, September 13th. We'll be having Thias Willer of Joy Masher. Joy Masher, the developer of Blazing Chrome. If you recall, we did a review of this about a month and a half ago. It's the game it's the 2D shooter that was aping Contra. I'm looking forward to it because I enjoyed me some Contra, and honestly, Blazing Chrome is one of the best games I've played all year. And let me see. Coming up on the Sunday game reviews, we'll be reviewing. I will be handling a review of Newt 1. Golix will be handling a review of Gravity Duck for the Nintendo Switch, and Twilight will be handling a game called Dystoria. So look for all that in the days ahead. And until then, I wish you good gaming.